We all want to understand what's really going on, right? Cut through all that noise and get straight to the core of what's happening in the world, especially here in Nepal. And that's exactly why we do the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the Nepali media landscape. We've analyzed a huge amount of information, over 4,800 newspapers, more than 1,000 radio stations, over 200 TV channels, and get this, over 4,000 online portals.
And the first thing that hits you when you see those numbers is just the sheer number of media outlets in Nepal, right? It gives you this sense that it's a very diverse information landscape, lots of voices, lots of perspectives. But the real question, the question we're tackling today, is what's underneath all that? What are the forces at work behind all these media outlets? Who's really calling the shots? We're going deeper than just counting them.
Exactly. We're not just here to list things off. We're diving deep into the influences, the agendas, the things that really shape what you see and hear. And for this deep dive, there's one central question. What are the key factors shaping Nepali media today? And that means we're going to be looking at political partisanship, business interests, corruption, and the role of international actors. And of course, what this all means for you, for the Nepali public. So let's start by understanding how Nepali media is categorized, and the concept of partisanship is a good place to begin.
So generally speaking, Nepali media outlets can be divided into two broad categories. Those that are clearly partisan, meaning they openly support a particular political party or ideology, and those that present themselves as more neutral.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's important to remember that true neutrality is pretty rare, isn't it?
Right. You're absolutely correct. Complete neutrality in media is very hard to find. Almost every outlet operates with some kind of bias, even if it's subtle.
So let's dive into those partisan outlets first. And I think the most obvious example, the classic case, is Grok AI. It's the state-owned newspaper. And its role, well, it's basically the voice of the government.
Exactly. That's the main function of state-owned media, pretty much everywhere. Grok AI is right in line with that. It's all about disseminating the perspectives and priorities of the ruling party. A good example. December 2023, 2 youths die in Gilchuk. Now that's major news for any citizen, but Grok AI buries it on the second page. What does that tell you about their priorities? They're not keen on highlighting things that might criticize the government.
And this isn't just a one-off thing. All our sources indicate that Grok AI has always sided with whoever's in power. And it's got a long history, 124 years, and a massive budget. We're talking 50 crore rupees annually. You'd think with all that money, everything would run smoothly. But there have been reports of delays in journal salaries. So where is all that public money going? Is it actually being used to inform the public?
That's the question you have to ask. And then we have Radio Nepal and Nepal Television, both state-run, both with the same lack of independence.
Right, and that lack of independence is built in, isn't it? Because the editors are chosen by the government, their political appointees. And of course, that affects what they cover and how they cover it.
Exactly. You saw this during the Oli government, right? Less coverage of the opposition, more praise for the ruling party. A very clear pattern.
And the 2022 local elections really show how imbalanced things can get. Reports indicate that Radio Nepal gave a whopping 80% of its airtime to the CPN-UML and the Nepali Congress Maoist Alliance. Less than 5% went to all the other opposition parties combined. Imagine that. That's not just reporting. That's shaping the narrative. And Nepal Television, same story. They reportedly broadcast Oli's speeches live, but cut footage of opposition protests.
Absolutely. That kind of skewed coverage is incredibly dangerous. It means you're not getting the full picture. It limits your ability to make informed choices. It distorts your understanding of the political landscape. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's look at the private media sector. And one of the biggest players is the Kantipur Media Group, generally seen as leaning towards the Nepali Congress.
And with private media, the influences are different. They're more about business interests, personal connections, but they're just as powerful. And during the 2022 elections, there were a lot of allegations of biased coverage favoring the Congress.
Right. And when you look at who owns Kantipur, Kailash Sirahia, it starts to make sense. This guy has huge business interests in hydropower and banking. These are sectors that are heavily regulated by the government. So the news you're reading in Kantipur, it might be influenced by these underlying financial and political considerations.
It's all connected, isn't it? The media outlet can be used for political influence. And those political connections, they can help the owner's businesses. You see this really clearly in 2021, when the Oli government allegedly stopped Kantipur's advertisement.
Right. Critical coverage leads to financial pressure. And that pressure eases up when a new government, the Duba government, comes to power. Very telling. the connection between the media outlet's stance and its financial well-being. It's right there in the open.
Then you have the Annapurna Post, another private newspaper owned by Rameshwar Thapa. And he's got big interests in Lalagur's era, right? So those interests can affect what you're reading in the newspaper.
Absolutely. Take the reporting on the aviation sector in 2023. Initially, it's critical, but then the government starts an inquiry and the tone shifts. It becomes much more subdued. That tells you that regulatory pressure from the government can influence editorial decisions. And there were also allegations that Thapa was using his media outlet to get government advertising deals.
So the pattern continues. Business interest shaping the news. And then there's Nagoric and Republika.
And their editorial line, it often reflects the views of Oli. During the 2022 elections, they gave a ton of coverage to development in Demak, Oli's hometown. But they seemed to ignore the opposition. And then in 2023, a journalist gets fired after complaining about their salary. Not a good look. It suggests a lack of transparency, maybe even some shady financial dealings. So if you're reading Nagoric or Republika, keep in mind it's likely filtered through a pro-UML lens.
So far, it's not a pretty picture. State media acts as the government's mouthpiece. Private media pushes the agendas of their owners. Are there any outlets in Nepal that are trying to be neutral, trying to offer a balanced perspective?
There are some that are definitely trying to navigate this difficult terrain. Setapadapi, for example, it's an online platform and it's often considered relatively independent. They do make an effort to show multiple sides of a story.
But even with those who aim for independence, biases can creep in. The source material mentions that the editor of Setapati used to work with Pradeep Gowali, a prominent CPN UML figure. Those personal connections can have an impact, even if it's unintentional. And then there's the pressure from advertisers. They need that revenue to survive.
That's the reality for any media organization that relies on advertising. You have to keep those advertisers happy. Setapati's coverage of the CPN UML's internal disputes in 2022 was quite balanced, though. So there's that. And Online Khabar, another big digital platform, also tries to present different perspectives. They covered both the police and the protesters' views during the Gyalchok incident in 2023.
But even they're not immune to pressure. There's that story about them removing a report on a bank scandal in 2021 because a major advertiser pressured them. It just shows how financial considerations can sometimes override journalistic principles.
Absolutely. And then there's Radapati. They aim for neutrality, and they did cover all the major parties during the 2022 elections. But the owner is known to be close to the Maoists, and that can introduce bias, even if it's not intentional.
So you have to be really careful, really discerning when you're navigating the Nepali media landscape. The lines between objective reporting and the agendas of owners and politicians are very blurry. Now, this brings us to a really important point. The whole web of business and political connections in Nepali media. This isn't just occasional overlap. It's woven into the fabric of how the media operates.
Exactly. It's not incidental. It's fundamental. Let's take government media. They get their money from the government. Their advertising revenue also comes from the government. So naturally, they become mouthpieces for the ruling party. The sheer amount of government advertising is staggering. Over 1 billion rupees in 2023. 60% of that went to state media.
That's a huge amount of money. And it's being used to promote the government's agenda. And there was also that story about Radio Nepal getting an extra 10 crore rupees in 2021, allegedly to suppress opposition to the citizenship bill. They're using public funds to push their own political goals. That should concern every taxpayer.
Absolutely. Now, back to Kantipur. Kailash Sirahia, with his huge business empire, he has a lot of political leverage, especially with the Nepali Congress. But if you criticize the government, there can be a price to pay. Like in 2021, when the Oli government pulled Kantipur's ads, then Kantipur launched that big anti-government campaign. It shows how business interests can drive editorial decisions.
And the same thing happens with Nagaric and Republika. They were pushing Oli's Damak Smart City project in 2022, but ignored the concerns about displacement and environmental impact.
Right. They're promoting a project that could benefit the owner's real estate company. Pretty clear connection there. And then there's Annapurna Post, with Rameshwar Thapa and his airline, Lalagurus Air. They softened their coverage of a Lalagurus plane crash in 2019 after alleged pressure from the government. So business deals and regulatory scrutiny, they can definitely affect what you read.
It's all a balancing act, isn't it? The owners are trying to juggle their business ambitions, their political leanings, and the need to make money, often from the very people they should be holding accountable. And then there's the fact that the major political parties, they have their own aligned media outlets.
That's another key factor. You have the Congress leaning towards Kantipur, the CPN UML towards Nagaric. The Maoists, with their close ties to radio stations like Janata FM, these connections shape the news agenda. Like when the Maoists used their media outlets to support the TikTok ban in 2023.
So finding truly independent media in Nepal is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Now, the source material also talks about allegations of corruption within Nepali media organizations. Obviously, proving corruption is very hard, but there's some pretty credible allegations and concerning trends.
You're right. Concrete proof can be hard to come by. But there are patterns. There are stories that raise serious questions. Let's look at Gorkapatra again. There was an allegation of a 50 lakh rupee bribe related to the appointment of an editor in 2020, and there was no investigation. Plus, there's all that money for government promotion, but journalists are complaining about delayed salaries. Where is the money going? It all points to a lack of transparency.
And then there's Kaltipur. With all those accusations of paid news during the 2014 elections, journalists supposedly getting 5 lakh rupees per story to write pro-Congress stuff. And then there's the whole controversy around Sirohia using Kantipur to protect himself during his citizenship fraud case in 2018. And there's that story about them killing a report on a hydropower scam in 2023 because advertisers were involved.
Yeah, that 2018 case is really concerning. It raises questions about whether media owners are using their power to avoid scrutiny. And silencing a story about a scam to protect financial interests, that's a huge red flag.
And Nagarik is no angel either. Lots of allegations of biased coverage favoring the CPN-UML during the 2022 elections, and rumors of deals between Chaudhry and Oli for mutual benefit. Plus, that journalist who got fired after complaining about unpaid salaries. Again, it all points to a lack of transparency.
And Annapurna Post has similar issues. There are claims that Thapa used the newspaper to lobby the government for his airline in 2019, and stories about news being suppressed because of advertisers. It seems like it's a recurring problem there.
And it's not just the big players. The source material mentions smaller online portals that are spreading fake news just for clicks.
Right. The internet has made it so easy to spread misinformation. Outlets like Hamro Desh and Nepal Live were publishing fake election surveys in 2022. They don't care about the truth. They just want clicks and advertising revenue.
It paints a very bleak picture of the Nepali media landscape. And what about the journalists working in this environment? They're facing some serious challenges. The source material talks about low wages, threats, and the chaos of the digital world.
The situation for journalists is dire. 70% of them aren't even getting the minimum wage, which is 20,556 rupees. And the Federation of Nepali Journalists recorded 55 media rights violations in 2023. Assaults, arrests, threats. It's a dangerous profession, especially if you're investigating powerful people. And then there's the digital world. The internet has created opportunities, but it's also a wild west of misinformation.
It's easy to set up an online news portal, but that means there's less oversight, less accountability.
Exactly. It's hard for the average person to tell what's real and what's fake. Even established platforms like Online Hagar and Radapati have published false information. Radapati had to apologize for a fake video about the Geopolitical incident, and Online Hakabar was spreading fake election surveys. They're all chasing clicks and ad revenue, and the truth gets lost in the process.
So journalists are dealing with low pay, threats, and the spread of misinformation. All this adds up to a real threat to press freedom in Nepal.
Absolutely. There were 52 press freedom violations in 2023. That's a huge number. And the government is trying to control social media. They see it as a way to restrict the media. Remember that Media Council bill from 2021? The one that proposed fines and jail time for journalists?
It's a worrying trend. So we've talked about the internal pressures on Nepali media, but what about external influences? What about the role of international actors?
That's another layer of complexity. International actors exert influence in various ways, not just through direct funding. Let's start with China. Their influence is growing. There was a report in 2024 that said the Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence Nepali journalists by offering them trips, training, and even education opportunities for their children. And then there's the Himalayan Times online portal, which promotes China's views.
And what about that video from 2022 that opposed U.S. grants to Nepal?
That video was spreading misinformation. It claimed that the U.S. was going to bring troops to Nepal, a clear example of how external actors use media to push their agendas.
So China's influence is pretty obvious. What about India? They seem to operate more subtly, according to the source material.
It's more indirect. For example, Kantipur Media Group is aligned with the Nepali Congress, which often aligns with India's interests. And there was a noticeable decrease in criticism of India after the 2015 blockade, especially after Dubba came to power. Plus, India can use advertising and business ties to influence media houses, And let's not forget that Nepal depends heavily on India for exports.
It's a complex relationship. And then we have the influence of the United States and other Western countries.
Organizations like FHI 360 are supporting independent media and civil society groups. They offer training and funding. They're trying to counter China's influence. But there have been allegations that they're pressuring outlets to report favorably on their initiatives. And some outlets, like Setapati, were very positive about the MCC agreement.
It's hard to know what's genuine support and what's influenced by external pressure. And then there are think tanks.
Right. Some media houses are connected to think tanks that are funded by foreign governments. Himokaba Patrika, for instance, has reportedly received funding from Danita and the Ford Foundation. These connections can shape the news agenda.
It's clear that Nepal's strategic location makes it a battleground for geopolitical competition, and the media is part of that battleground.
Absolutely. You see it in the coverage of the MCC grant. Chinese media was critical, Kantipur and Setapati were supportive. And then there's the competition between India and China in hydropower and infrastructure. Nagurk tends to favor China, Kantipur favors India, and even the TikTok ban has geopolitical implications.
Right. There are allegations that the Maoists and the Chinese government were behind the ban, and pro-Maoist media supported the ban, while independent outlets criticized it. And let's not forget about the Tibetan refugee issue. China pressures Nepal to restrict their activities, and that affects media coverage. Outlets like Gorkha don't report much on that issue. So we've covered the political and geopolitical influences. 60% of Nepali media revenue comes from advertising, and those advertisers have influence. Larger media houses might be making 10-15 crore rupees a year, but smaller ones struggle to reach 50 lakh. That financial pressure leads to compromises, like Online Khabar removing that bank scandal report because the owner had banking connections. It's a vicious cycle. Financial pressure leads to bad reporting, which erodes public trust. Now, let's shift gears again and look at the different media platforms in Nepal. YouTube, radio, TV, online portals, social media, they all have their own dynamics.
Okay, YouTube. It's exploded in Nepal. More people have smartphones and internet access, so they're turning to YouTube for news.
But most of the popular channels aren't about serious news, are they?
Not really. It's mostly music, gaming, reality shows, entertainment stuff. The news channels that do exist are often sensationalized and clickbaity. Remember that fake video about the Galchok incident? And then there are all those fake news stories and exaggerated content. They're just chasing views and ad revenue.
Entertainment trumps truth.
It seems that way. And there's a clear influence from American and Indian YouTube trends. Very few truly independent journalism channels. And the big channels, they were mostly silent during the protests against the TikTok ban. Probably afraid of the consequences.
Now, what about radio? Radio Nepal was once the most powerful voice, but it's been declining.
It's lost relevance. It's a government mouthpiece, and people have other options now. Private radio stations sprang up after 2007, but many have shut down due to financial problems.
So who are the big players in radio now?
You have Radio Nepal, of course, still pushing the government's agenda. Then there's Kantipur FM with its mix of news and entertainment, and there's a bit of Congress influence there. Ujalo 90 Network is a good example of community radio, but they have budget issues. And Image FM is more of a news syndicate. They produce content in Kathmandu and send it out to other stations.
The source material mentions something called syndication cancer.
That's what Professor P. Carroll calls it. He's worried that these syndicates are killing local radio. They're monopolizing information and making it harder for smaller stations to be independent. And the radio industry is in a financial crisis. Many stations have closed because advertising revenue has plummeted. They can't afford to pay their journalists properly.
It's a dying breed.
Almost. And international organizations like BBC Media Action and DW Academy are involved too. Some radio stations supported the TikTok ban, others stayed silent. It makes you wonder about external pressures. And radio ownership has been declining. People are turning to their phones for news and entertainment.
Okay, let's touch on the other platforms quickly. Television. Lots of channels, but viewership is fragmented. Key channels often have political leanings, and there's a lot of influence from Indian channels. Some Indian channels were even banned for not paying fees.
Right, and then online portals, over 4,000 of them. But public trust in social media news is low. It's the same problems we've talked about. Advertising pressure, owner interests, and social media. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, they're all big in Nepal. They're used for protests, but they're also full of fake news.
And they're tools for geopolitical influence. China with TikTok, the US with Facebook and YouTube, it's a messy landscape.
It is. So YouTube is mostly entertainment and sensationalism. Radio is struggling. TV is influenced by India and the government. Online quarrels are driven by owner interests. And social media is a battleground for misinformation and geopolitical agendas.
It's all connected. Now, the source material asks us a very important question. Are Nepali media making citizens ignorant, or are they steering agendas? And the source material seems to think it's the latter.
I agree. It's not a conspiracy, but the way Nepali media operates, it shapes how people think and what they talk about. It sets the agenda.
How do they do that?
Well, first, they prioritize sensationalism and emotion over facts. They're constantly bombarding you with agendas. Every media outlet has an agenda. Gorkapatra pushes the government's agenda. Kantipur leans towards the Congress. Nagurk favors the UML. And then you have all the fake news and trolls online. And it's not just the content, it's the format.
Right. Short videos on TikTok, clickbait thumbnails on YouTube, they don't encourage critical thinking.
Exactly. People are consuming information passively. They're not analyzing it. And external powers are also playing a role. China promoting the Belt and Road Initiative, Western funding influencing coverage. It's geopolitical programming.
So is the public becoming more ignorant?
I think so. Look at those fake election surveys. People believe them. They're swayed by speeches and media hype. Radio ownership is declining, and short-form video consumption is exploding. It's a worrying trend.
People are drowning in emotion, aren't they? Emily's nationalist rhetoric, the protests against the TikTok ban, people are reacting emotionally without thinking critically.
And the truth is getting lost. Important stories are being suppressed, like that bank scandal report. People are only getting part of the story. And the coverage of the MCC agreement was so different depending on the media outlet's alignment. People are divided without understanding the full context.
And then there's the cultural influence. Nepali YouTube channels copying Indian and Western content. It's eroding Nepali originality.
It's a form of cultural programming. People are being programmed to consume foreign content. They're chasing media trends instead of seeking truth.
So how does this programming work?
It's all about clicks and views. Sensational content gets more attention. Advertisers want their products to be seen by a large audience, so media outlets cater to their interests. Political parties use media to promote their agendas. Short-form content doesn't allow for in-depth analysis. And social media algorithms reinforce your existing biases, creating echo chambers.
It's a perfect storm of ignorance.
It is, and the consequences are serious. An ignorant public, societal polarization, the decline of critical thinking, cultural erosion.
It's a bleak picture. But what can we do about it?
We need to be more critical. Check your sources. Seek out different perspectives. Don't be swayed by emotion. Limit your consumption of short-form content. And most importantly, express your own views. Don't let the media do all the thinking for you.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. The Nepali media landscape is complex and concerning. There's so much influence from political parties, business interests, international actors. It's a challenge to find unbiased information.
It is. And the way the media operates, it can make people ignorant. It can manipulate them. It's a serious problem.
So what's our responsibility as citizens? How do we find reliable information in this digital age? How do we resist manipulation? Those are the questions we need to keep asking ourselves. Every time we consume media, we need to be critical, we need to be aware. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.